Now, obviously, if a man's mother needs to be taken care of, and he's responsible for the mother. If he's the first son, right, he's responsible for the mother. And if he's not able to do it, then the other males in the family, they're responsible to take care of the mother, which is an honor. It's an honor.
Like in some circumstances, it becomes necessary that, for example, there's no father, and the mother is just single. You can't leave the mother in a separate home after marriage. So is it like, do you think it is more...
Well, you could, but, if they're living in a Muslim place, you could, but it would be, it would not be customary in most Muslim countries to do that. What's that?
We're not customary, as far as Sharia is concerned. Like you are leaving your mother one side and you are...
Yeah, no, you should take care of your mother, right? But if your mother wanted to live on her own, if you were there where you could help her, take care of her needs and things like that, there's, as long as it's in a safe environment, things like that. But if the proper thing, given the urf of the Muslims and the responsibilities related to the mother, is taking care of the mother in her old age, that's a given in Islam. The Prophet ﷺ, one man was changing his mother's linen, because she was decrepit, and he asked the Prophet if that was birr, was that piety, filial piety to the mother, and the Prophet said, no, that's just recompension. You're just doing to her what she did to you when you were a baby. Now she's in her old age. Yes, absolutely. Yeah. Your parents are your parents, whether they're Muslim or not.
When we read that paradise lies under the feet of the mother.
Absolutely.
Like, I think personally that it's more better if you take care of mother and keep her with you instead of putting her in a separate...
No, you should. Yeah, definitely that would be unless that she didn't want to. There are reasons why she wouldn't want to.
If your wife doesn't want to, in that instance.
And your mother does. I mean,
let me wait till Sheikh Abdullah comes in. He can answer that question for you.
There's also a difference between if your
What's that?
parents need to be cared for, or if it's
Right.
out of your parent, you want the person to live in your home, and your
Right.
parents are still of sound health.
And then there's some meddling parents, right? I mean, that is a phenomenon. You get meddling parents. That's a phenomenon. You get the mother that she comes in and takes over and stuff. It happens. I mean, we have to be realistic.
Yeah.
That does happen, and it becomes very disruptive for marital situations, right? I mean, it does happen. And it does, some marriages actually break down because of that. And I've seen it with my own eyes within Muslim families. It's just disastrous. So.
That's why they make the in-law apartment, where you can have some separation, but you also have a return.
In-law apartment. No, absolutely. It's called an in-law. Even to this day, to build a small, in most zonings, if you have a house, you can build, even though it's an R1, like it's residential 1, you can very easily get zoning for what's called an in-law outlet, which is the idea is that it's not a house on its own, but it's a place where one of the parents or the parents could live in their old age. And that's true. And I'll give you another. The truth is that many of the Muslim houses were designed for sacred space. They were designed, if you go to traditional houses, you will see that they were designed to accommodate more than one family with the necessary observances of the courtesies of Sharia, right? Whereas now you get people living in apartments, where there's no space at all, and it becomes very kind of incestuous, and just it's very difficult to function. Now, for some people, these are just necessities. I mean, you have a lot of people in these cultures where it's just necessity. And I think also, again, this is urf, because, for instance, in some cultures, the families being in that tight space is, it's not a problem, whereas with other cultures, it is, right? And certainly, I mean, the family unity and the family binding is much stronger in Muslim culture than it is in non-Muslim culture. And even within this culture, within minorities, minorities being other than the dominant, which is soon to be, a minority itself, but the dominant white or Anglo culture, you'll still find family ties are stronger. Family ties, I mean, for most Muslims, the vast majority of Muslims, the idea of putting your parents into an old folks' home is just anathema. I mean, just not. Muslims just shake their head. They can't understand that, right? They really can't. Whereas in this culture, there's no stigma attached to it anymore. I mean, personally, my family, and I don't know if it's, the remnants of the Greek background or what, but I don't think any of my immediate, like my brothers and sisters, could imagine that, personally. I really don't. But there's certainly a lot of families that do. And one of the things I noticed when I was working in the hospital is that there's the Chinese people would be sick. And, when you're working like as an RN, the Asian patients were always kind of a blessing because the family would take care of them. Literally, they would feed them. They'd oftentimes bring their own food in. They'd wash them. They didn't want you washing their mother. It's my mother. I don't want a stranger washing my mother. They would do all that stuff. And same with the African American. You would see that more. There'd be more visitors. There'd be more. Mexican, definitely. A lot of the Anglo or the white, they'd be in the hospital for days and not get a visitor. Very common, seriously. And, I just saw this all the time.
Even if they do, they prefer the nurse to watch.
Exactly. What was that?
I was just going to say, at the same time, they would want to be careful about stereotyping too, because if you're a white American and you would not want to do that to your parents, I mean, especially if you become Muslim, and you don't want to do that to your parents, we would want to be careful about that too, to just not assume that because we're American, we would want to do that.
No, I totally agree with that, but it's common in this culture. It's not uncommon. That's the point. It's not a shock. For, if you hear from somebody in this culture, I was visiting my mother at, at the rest home or something like that. That's not a shock. Whereas a Muslim, to say that within a group of Muslims, it would just be like, what? I mean, I'm not making this up. So I agree with that. And I would say that my family personally, I think that would be shocking if one of us suggested that about our parents.
Some of that, and doesn't that have to do with like such a strong binding within the family? I mean, part of that has to do with growing up together in that same house, and that attachment comes from growing up together.
I think, the extended family's stronger still, but that used to be the way in this country. Don't forget that. See, this is not, family in this country is. We're seeing the breakdown of the culture, right? We're seeing the breakdown of the culture. There was a time in this country that parents lived in the house. Really, it wasn't that long ago. There was a time when you did have these type of family bonds. And I think that you will see them begin to break down within the Muslims that moved to this country after it's already starting to happen, second, third generation. Seriously, don't think we're immune to it as Muslims, right?
In our culture.
Oh, what's that?
It's called ABCD. It means American born, confused, and D means native, basically.
Right. So, I think that the generation of Americans that grew up in this country in, say, the 30s and 40s, it was very different. The breakdown starts, it's a post-war, it's related to the post-war phenomenon, and it really becomes exacerbated in the 60s, and then, the baby boomers coming of age. There's a lot of breakdown going on in this culture. And old folks' homes are, they're recent phenomenons. They're not, it's not something traditionally that...
It works the other way around. Also, the old people say, I don't want my kids to take care of me.
There are a lot of parents that don't. They would see it as actually something undignified for them. That's true. Because there's a lot. That's another thing. I'm glad you brought that up. It's a very good point. That there are a lot of people in this country that do have a sense, of pride, of not, I don't want to be, because, again, we go back to that idea of independence, individuality, I can take care of myself. There's a very strong sense of that, sense of self in this culture. And the idea that I am going to become dependent on my children is, that's quite horrifying for many, many people. I'm really glad you brought that up, because that's another way of looking at it, is that that is true. There are people that really would rather have a nurse taking care of them than their children, especially if they could afford the nurse,
And many of those people had their grandparents in their household.
Right.
And
Yeah.